In the smoldering ruins of Berlin, April 1945, as Soviet forces closed in on the German capital, a woman made a decision that would forever mark her as one of history's most disturbing enigmas. In a concrete bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, Magda Goebbels, wife of Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, methodically murdered her 6 children before taking her own life. This final act of devotion to a fallen regime was the culmination of a journey that began in the genteel parlors of pre-war Berlin and ended in the apocalyptic finale of the Third Reich. Johanna Maria Magdalena Ritschl was born on November 11, 1901, in Berlin to an unmarried Catholic maid named August Biran. Her biological father, Oskar Ritschl, a wealthy building contractor, married her mother shortly after Magda's birth, legitimizing the child but providing little stability. The marriage lasted only 3 years before ending in divorce. The young girl's life took another turn in 1908 when her mother married Richard Friedel Ender, a prosperous Jewish businessman. Friedel Ender adopted Magda, giving her his name and welcoming her into a comfortable, bourgeois lifestyle in Brussels, Belgium. Here, the foundations of her education were laid at the Ursuline convent, where teachers remembered her as an active and intelligent little girl, with a facility for languages and social graces. The irony of Magda's upbringing cannot be overstated. This woman, who would later stand beside the architects of the Holocaust, grew up with a Jewish stepfather who provided her with stability, education, and opportunity. When the First World War erupted in 1914, the family fled Belgium, returning to Germany. August soon divorced Friedel Ender, but Magda's privileged education continued thanks to financial support from her biological father. During these formative years, Magda developed a romantic relationship with Viktor Chaim Arlosoroff, a young Jewish intellectual and Zionist activist. The relationship with Arlosoroff reveals the first of many contradictions in Magda's life. She wore the Star of David, attended Jewish youth meetings, and even considered emigrating to Palestine. This doesn't square with the woman who would later embrace Nazi ideology without question. This romance eventually faded, but it was only the first in a series of relationships that would define Magda's rise through German society. In February 1920, 19-year-old Magda found herself sharing a first-class train compartment with industrialist Jew Enter Quandt, a widower twice her age and one of Germany's wealthiest men. Struck by her beauty, poise, and intelligence, Quandt pursued her relentlessly. They married in January 1921, and Magda gave birth to their son Harold in November of that same year. The marriage elevated Magda into the highest echelons of German society, but brought its own constraints. Beyond caring for Harold and Quandt's 2 sons from his previous marriage, Magda found herself stifled by her husband's austere personality and controlling nature. Magda Quandt was trapped in a gilded cage. She craved intellectual stimulation and social engagement, but Junether expected a dutiful wife who would prioritize domestic responsibilities over personal fulfillment. This tension would eventually rupture their marriage. That rupture came in 1928, when Quandt discovered Magda's affair with a university student. Though cast out of her husband's home, Magda proved herself a shrewd negotiator. Threatening to publish compromising letters from Quandt's past liaisons, she secured a generous settlement: 50,000 Reichsmarks for a new apartment, 4,000 Reichsmarks monthly, and custody of their son Harold. Now independently wealthy, divorced, and still only in her late 20s, Magda found herself at a crossroads in the tumultuous Weimar Republic of 1929. As economic depression gripped Germany, political extremism flourished. On August 30th, 1930, the restless and politically curious Magda attended a Nazi party rally where she first encountered Joseph Goebbels, the fiery Gauleiter of Berlin. His passionate oratory captivated her immediately. Goebbels represented everything Magda's first husband was not: passionate, intellectual, and charismatic. He offered not just romance but purpose. For a woman seeking meaning beyond domestic confinement, this was intoxicating. Magda joined the Nazi Party the very next day, beginning volunteer work that soon brought her into Goebbels' inner circle. By February 1931, their professional relationship had blossomed into romance, despite Goebbels' ongoing relationship with another woman and Magda's continued liaison with her student lover. Their courtship was turbulent from the start, marked by jealousies and arguments. Yet by autumn of 1931, their relationship had acquired significance beyond personal romance when Magda was introduced to Adolf Hitler over tea at Berlin's Hotel Kaiserhof. Hitler was immediately taken with Magda, reportedly remarking, "This woman could play a major role in my life, even without me being married to her." A strange triangular relationship began to form, with Hitler developing what witnesses described as an unusually close friendship with Magda. Hitler's interest in Magda transcended mere physical attraction. He saw in her the embodiment of Aryan womanhood, elegant, intelligent, and maternal. She represented the idealized German woman he wanted to showcase to the world. With Hitler's blessing, Magda and Joseph married on December 19, 1931. The ceremony took place at Magda's ex-husband's estate in Severin. Without Quant's knowledge, Hitler served as best man, while 10-year-old Harold attended in his Hitler Youth uniform, symbolizing the merging of personal and political identities that would characterize the marriage. Between 1932 and 1940, Magda bore 6 children, each deliberately given names beginning with H in honor of Hitler: Helga, Hild, Helmut, Hold, Hedda, and Hyde. These children would become powerful propaganda tools for the Nazi regime, presented as the ideal Aryan family. When the Nazis seized power in January 1933, Magda's role expanded beyond that of wife and mother, with Hitler maintaining his carefully cultivated image as a celibate man devoted solely to Germany, and his relationship with Eva Braun kept strictly secret. Magda assumed the unofficial but vital position of First Lady of the Third Reich. Magda Goebbels embodied Nazi feminine ideals. Impeccably dressed in German-designed clothing, she played hostess at diplomatic receptions, accompanied visiting dignitaries' wives, and represented German womanhood to the world. Propaganda portrayed her as the perfect mother, despite the reality that nannies and governesses handled most of the childcare. The gap between image and reality was striking. Magazines depicted Magda baking with her children and tending to domestic duties, but in truth, she was often absent for weeks, tending to social obligations or recuperating at spas. The perfect Nazi mother was largely an invention of her husband's propaganda machine. In 1938, she allowed her children to be filmed as exemplars of pure Aryan children, contrasted with footage of disabled children described as worthless in Nazi ideology. She embraced her role in normalizing and glamorizing the regime's brutal worldview. Meanwhile, the Goebbels marriage was deteriorating. Joseph's numerous affairs with actresses and secretaries became increasingly difficult for Magda to ignore. The facade of marital bliss crumbled completely in the summer of 1938 when Joseph fell passionately in love with Czech actress Elida Barova and proposed a 3-way marriage arrangement. The Barova affair created a potential scandal that threatened the regime's carefully crafted image. When Goebbels suggested maintaining relationships with both women, Magda appealed directly to Hitler, knowing he valued her as a symbol of Nazi domesticity. Hitler intervened decisively, ordering Goebbels to end the affair immediately and arranging for publicity photos of himself with the reconciled couple. What remained hidden was Magda's own affair with Karl Henke, one of her husband's state secretaries. The hypocrisy extended beyond their marriage. Even as Magda presented herself as the face of German motherhood, she made no attempt to save her Jewish stepfather, Richard Friedel Nender, who was deported to Buchenwald concentration camp in June 1938. He died there in February 1939, officially from heart muscle failure. There's no evidence Magda tried to intervene on Friedel Nender's behalf, despite her considerable influence. This speaks volumes about her moral compartmentalization. She could separate her personal history from the murderous ideology she now embraced. When war erupted in September 1939, Magda's public persona adapted to the national emergency. She trained as a Red Cross nurse, worked at the Telefunken electronics company, and made much publicized efforts to share in the hardships of ordinary Germans, riding public transportation and comforting war widows. As bombing raids intensified, Magda moved with the children to their country estate in 1943, while Joseph remained in Berlin, continuing his extramarital affairs. Increasingly, Magda suffered from health problems, including severe depression and trigeminal neuralgia that left her frequently bedridden. By 1944, Magda's private doubts were surfacing. She once switched off Hitler's radio address, calling it rubbish. She complained he no longer listened to reason. Yet when the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler failed, she immediately reaffirmed her loyalty, declaring herself willing to die if the Russians reached Berlin. As Soviet forces encircled Berlin in April 1945, the myth of the thousand-year Reich collapsed into rubble. On April 20th, Hitler's birthday, Russian artillery began shelling central Berlin. 2 days later, the entire Goebbels family moved into Hitler's underground bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden. Magda rejected several offers to evacuate her children from the doomed city, including one from Albert Speer. Instead, she prepared for the end, confiding to Hitler's secretary Traudl Junji, "I would rather have my children die than live in disgrace," jeered at. "My children stand no chance in Germany after the war." Magda's decision to murder her children reflects a twisted logic rooted in narcissism and ideological fanaticism. She couldn't imagine a world without National Socialism, couldn't bear the thought of her children living in a Germany that had rejected Hitler's vision, and couldn't face the consequences of her complicity in the regime's crimes. To her sister-in-law from her first marriage, eloquent, Magda revealed her reasoning more fully, would have demanded monstrous things from the German people, treated other nations with pitiless cruelty. For this the victors will exact their full revenge. Suppose I remain alive, I should immediately be arrested and interrogated about Joseph. If I tell the truth, I must reveal what sort of man he was. It would be equally impossible to do the opposite, that is to defend what he has done, to justify him to his enemies. It would be quite impossible for me to go on living. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler and Eva Braun, whom he had married the previous day, committed suicide. Joseph and Magda Goebbels decided to follow, but first they would ensure their children did not survive them. On the evening of May 1st, Magda had the children dressed in white nightgowns. She asked dentist Helmut Kunz to inject them with morphine to render them unconscious. Then, with the assistance of Hitler's personal physician Ludwig Stumpfegger, she crushed cyanide capsules between their teeth, methodically killing Helga, Hild, Helmut, Hold, Hedda, and Hade ages 12 to 4. With their children dead, Joseph and Magda walked to the Chancellery Garden. Joseph shot Magda and then himself. Their bodies were doused with gasoline and burned. Though the cremation was incomplete, Soviet troops discovered their charred remains the following day, May 2nd, 1945. The children were found in their beds, ribbons still tied in the girl's hair, appearing as if in peaceful sleep, victims of their mother's final act of loyalty to a genocidal regime. Harold Quandt, Magda's son from her first marriage, survived the war. He had been serving in the Luftwaffe and became a prisoner of war in 1945. Later, together with his half-brother Herbert Quandt, he inherited his father's industrial empire, including a significant stake in BMW, laying the foundation for one of Germany's wealthiest families today. The remains of Magda, Joseph, and their 6 children were repeatedly buried and exhumed over the decades. Finally, in April 1970, Soviet KGB agents cremated the remains, crushed the bones, and scattered the ashes into the Biederitz River, a tributary of the Elbe. Magda Goebbels remains an unsettling figure in history, a woman of intelligence and privilege who aligned herself with genocide and ultimately murdered her own children rather than allow them to live in a world without National Socialism. Her journey from the adopted daughter of a Jewish businessman to First Lady of the Third Reich encapsulates the moral corruption that defined the Nazi era. What makes Magda's story so disturbing is that she wasn't a marginalized, an educated person susceptible to crude propaganda. She was cultured, multilingual, and had moved in diverse social circles. Her embrace of Nazi ideology was a choice made with awareness of alternatives. Perhaps most chilling is how Magda's final act, the murder of her children, reveals the ultimate perversion of motherhood under totalitarianism. When ideology becomes more important than the instinct to protect one's offspring, we see the full horror of what happens when political fanaticism consumes basic humanity. Magda Goebbels' life trajectory from bourgeois comfort to ideological fanaticism to infanticide stands as a stark warning about the deceptive power of extremism and the moral collapse. In her story, we see not just one woman's tragic choices, but a cautionary tale about the dangers when personal identity becomes inseparable from a destructive ideology. Her legacy remains that of a woman who represented the Nazi regime to its bitter end, a regime responsible for the systematic murder of millions, and who, in her final hours, could imagine no world worth living in beyond the ruined vision of the Third Reich.